38th parallel north forms the border between North Korea and South Korea. One of my great-grandpa's greatest accomplishments in his life was being one of the very first men to ever live on the 38th parallel. However, 18 years prior to this accomplishment, there was another major life event. David James Gorseth was welcomed into the world on May 30, 1927 at sometime around 7 a.m. David weighed a little over 7 pounds, but he says he doesn't quite remember getting weighed. David was welcomed into the world by his parents Melvin Edward Gorseth and Ida Louise Schlafly, and his older brother Donald. He also had another older brother named Melvin Jr., however, he died at just 3 days old. David remembers his mother telling him that Melvin looked perfect on the outside, but his insides were all backwards. Following David was his sister Winifred and his youngest brother Merton. Today, all of his siblings have passed, except for his sister, who lives now in San Antonio, Texas. On his dad's side, his grandparents were Ole Gorseth and Julia Gorseth, who both came to the U.S. from Norway. On his mother's side was Benedict Schlafly and Anna Pauli, who came to the U.S. from Switzerland. David lived a very pleasant home life, however, he knew there were certain chores that needed to be done. Him and his family lived in a small farmhouse in rural Irene, South Dakota. David's parents were farmers, and his mother was also a school teacher. Because Ida taught where near Melvin farmed, this is how they ended up meeting each other. One memory that sticks in David's mind still today was a pretty scary one. When he was little, somebody had a huge water tank at their house. He was trying to pull out a bucket filled with water. However, the bucket overpowered him and he flipped into the tank. That was scary as a kid, he says. Another fearful moment for the whole family was when David's younger sister got her hand stuck in a corn sheller. Winifred was never able to write well after that, and she never went near the sheller again. When David was little, holidays and birthdays were always a great time. On the 4th of July, he would always go to his neighbor's house and celebrate. For birthdays, his mother would make an angel food cake and sometimes even homemade ice cream. David's birthday was always on Memorial Day, so he thought that the reason they created Memorial Day was because it was his birthday. But however, he knows that's not quite true today. As for school years, David attended the first 8 grades in the Sunrise School District, and he had to walk about 1.75 miles every day to get to school. He loved math and history, and his favorite teacher was Mrs. Bride, because she was always very nice and patient, and she was a classmate of his mother. David attended high school in Irene, South Dakota, and was involved in many extracurricular activities such as speech, football, basketball, track, and Boys League Hub. A major athletic accomplishment of my grandpa's was being part of the very first undefeated football team in his school's history when he was a senior. However, with these accomplishments came rougher times as well. In April, he lost a classmate and one of his closest friends. He was putting gas in his car when he caught fire. Also, in this period of time, the country was still in the tail end of World War II. Every 18-year-old boy knew that soon after graduation, they would soon be drafted and sent away. So the topic of after-graduation plans was a sore, quiet subject. After graduation was a tougher time in David's life. Just a few weeks after graduation, he was already in the Army. He says that at that time, boys grew up pretty fast, and he just hoped that he would make it home to see his family again. Following his time in the Army, David eventually went to a continuing education school in Nebraska. His second job after this was working in the C Division for Cargill Incorporated. His third occupation was managing the Arlington elevator, and his fourth was a business consultant for farmland. David was also a farmer for most of his life. His favorite job was managing the elevator, and when asked why, he replied with, "Because my heart has always been and always will be in agriculture." My grandpa met my grandma on a blind date set up by a close friend who passed shortly after in the gas accident. She was actually supposed to be set up with a different friend of his, but things didn't quite work out that way. So on February 14, 1948, in rural Irene, South Dakota, David and Artis said their I-do's, and today they've been married for 68 years. Throughout their marriage, they lived in many places together. The first 3 farms were just west of Irene, and the next 2 were west of Viborg, South Dakota. Next, they moved to Viborg, and from there they moved to Arlington. After living in Arlington, they have now lived in Lennox, South Dakota for 42 years. Next, I asked him what some important things he learned about marriage were. My grandma replied with, "Oh boy, I better go make some coffee." However, my grandpa said that everything is give and take, and you always have to sit down and talk about everything. Just shortly after getting married, David had his first of 5 children. Marilyn Gale, who's my grandma, was born on August 19, 1948. 2 years later, Mary Louise was born on June 19, 1950, and shortly after her came Marcia Ann on October 24, 1951. 4 years after came Carol Janine on December 18, 1855, and then lastly, 9 years later, came Mark David, who was born on February 9, 1964. My grandpa told me of the time when his 3 oldest daughters went out to the hog yards, rolled in the dust, and went to the water tank to jump in. David remembers this surprising him because he never thought his 3 little girls would go out and do such a boyish, dirty thing. Another story that sticks with him is when his 3rd daughter, Marcia, put her tooth in a glass of water for the tooth fairy just as any other child would. After she did this, a thirsty hired help came in the house and drank the whole glass of water, without even noticing the tooth. However, he later found out what he had consumed. Some important things my grandpa passed down to his children are always to be honest and respect those who are in authority of you. Also, he wanted his children to be willing to do the things that may not be something you want to do, but needs to be done. David's next chapter in his life was one of his most favorites. He finally became a grandpa and a great-grandpa. I asked my grandpa what similarities he saw between him and his grandchildren were. He responded with, well, that would be bragging about myself. But they always wanted to study and learn more, just like I did, and that pleases me. David never knew what it was like to have a grandpa, so he enjoys the experience so much every day. One dream my grandpa always had was that one day a boy from each family would become a farmer. Well, this wish came true, and this gives him great pleasure. In conclusion, David has lived a very satisfying and eventful 89 years. The legacy he hopes to leave behind is that he showed an example. He wants to leave behind to his children and grandchildren an example of living life to the fullest and having no regrets when God calls you. I certainly know that he has accomplished this legacy. This is the story of a faithful, marvelous man living an extraordinary but yet very extraordinary life. And I'm so very thankful to call this ordinary man my grandpa. And however, on Sunday, April 3, David's wife Ortis was disconnected from life support and she passed away. She had 2 strokes early in the week and things went downhill fast. After nearly 70 years of marriage, everything was gone in what felt like a heartbeat. This biography is not only telling the story of an extraordinary man, but also honoring the life of an amazing woman.